Okay, I've hit record. Paul Cohen here, 18th of May 2020, here in New Zealand. We're in level 2 of our lockdown, so there's a bit more freedom that we're allowed. And I'm doing one of my Zoom in Touch wisdom talks, and have got Allison Davies here, all the way from Tasmania. So Jasmine's got some amazing qualifications. She's a neurologic music therapist and brain care specialist. What an awesome title. And you do brain behaviours with children, brain care, CAF. You've got the 11 pillars of brain care, and it looks like it's all related to music, sound, and how we communicate through our voice, or a lot of it. So I've just given you a wee little introduction. Allison, thanks for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So the part of this Zoom in Touch was, it kind of started with my, I suppose, a little bit of frustration at the beginning of lockdown, and wanted to see if I could just come up with some forum where I could meet with people who I know, or people that I get in touch with around the world, who have got something that they can offer that's really substantial for ourselves, that we can do for ourselves. And I think it was right at the beginning of lockdown, I heard you doing your little singing, every little cell in my body. And it was at the time when probably every little cell in my body was just in a lot of pain, eh? And I started singing that, and I went, you know, this is what I teach, but I do it in a different way. And I just felt myself a bit kind of stuck, I suppose, or just in the midst of it. I think it was a good experience. I think we've all kind of had our ups and downs and gone into tunnels and all this kind of stuff. So, and I said, I want you on my Zoom in Touch.
Well, you know, when I did sing Every Little Cell, firstly though, I've just got to, because I drop this in everywhere I can. It's not my song. I didn't write it. It's a very, very old song.
Yes, I get that. Yes.
Yeah. A lot of people have been emailing me going, that's not your song. So I'm just trying to tell everyone everywhere I am.
Yeah, fantastic.
When I sang that song on my Facebook page, firstly, I did not expect millions of people to see it. I kind of just thought it might be 100.
Yes.
I might have made an effort or thought about what I was going to say otherwise, but it just came to mind because it was right at the beginning of the lockdown, and there was still so much uncertainty. I think in Australia and New Zealand, we're a few weeks behind the rest of the world in really understanding what was going on. And so there was just so much uncertainty. And I'm in my work as a neurologic music therapist, I specialize, and what I'm most passionate about is teaching people to use music as a tool for regulation and anxiety management. And so I know that when we're in a time of uncertainty, or what I call unpredictability, when our brain just cannot predict what's going to come next, that's when we're most likely to be dysregulated. And singing is one of the best tools that we can use to soothe the body and the nervous system and the brain, and to regulate and to move out of survival mode. But not only that, the words, every little cell in my body is healthy, happy, every little cell in my body as well, they just felt so conducive to what people really needed to remind themselves right now in that moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How many views did you get?
Well, I think it's something like 12 million. I haven't checked it for a while. I know.
Amazing.
That's the behind the scenes insights on the reach of how many people have seen it. Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's because it probably helped 12 million people too, that they could sing that, or kids, or.
Yeah, like within that same week, I didn't realize how fast it was spreading. And you know, I had a phone call the next day from the BBC, and I sang it on the radio in England, and I had photos and videos from people in Italy who were singing it. You know, those videos that went around of people singing from their balconies. Yep, they were singing it.
In Italian or in English?
I don't know. I couldn't open the thing. I'm not hugely technologically minded. So I've been missing a lot. I've been getting videos from people all around the world singing it in so many different languages. It's been brilliant, but I'm pretty sure I've missed a lot of it. But yeah, it's definitely, and I think that's, you know, music transcends all barriers. There's no barrier, there's no language barrier, there's nothing that means music is not accessible to anyone. Although I got to say, we tend to make music into a privileged commodity when we think being musical is about being able to play an instrument or being able to sing in tune. That is our own mind frame around music that actually does make it less inclusive. But when we think of musicality as anyone being able to access a tune or appreciate a tune or be soothed or relaxed because of a tune, you know, anyone in the world, to be human is to be musical. So I think the reason it hits such a chord is because we're all musical beings, but also it at a time of confusion, not knowing what's coming next, we're all a little bit in a heightened state. It reminded us of our most basic human instinct as humans is to, you know, sing to our children. And when our children are anxious, you know, from the moment we're born, we don't know the moment our children are born, we have no idea what we're doing really. We just sing. It's our most basic instinct. We sing to our children. So I think it reminded everyone just that at a time of unknown, just the most instinctive thing is beautiful and brilliant and effective.
Yeah. For me, it was probably like every little cell in my body was really confused at that time. So singing it was going, and it definitely made an effect on so many different levels. It was so cool. It was really, and I realised that power of sound. So we do the same thing in many ways. I've looked through your website. I've looked at your 12 pillars of brain care, which are really supportive, that maybe you'll want to talk about as well in a minute. And it's partly looking at how we can get into our parasympathetic system, isn't it? And look at slowing things down or not being in that flight and fright mode.
Yeah. So what research shows us about music and the brain? Firstly, you know, it's only been in the last sort of 15 or so years that we've really known anything about the brain. When I was at uni studying my Master of Music Therapy, you know, that was less than 20 years ago. And I was taught then that the brain stops developing at a certain age, and that if you don't experience language by 8, you'll never be able to talk, and it stops at 25 and all of this kind of stuff. And that's what the science was then. And it's been really literally in the last 15, 20 years that we've learned about the brain and that we understand neuroplasticity and we understand the potential there, that it really is that new. The research on music and the brain it's also very new. I mean, although we have throughout the whole of history used music as a tool, but the science of it, the research that proves it, is relatively new. But what science shows us now is that when our brain experiences music, and experiencing it means either listening to it, making it ourselves, or even thinking about it. So if we have a song, just a tune in our head going over and over like a little earworm, or if we're singing to ourselves inside our mind, that is an experience of music. And when our brain experiences music, more of it becomes active simultaneously than when we experience any other thing. That research has shown, that has been researched. So it is the absolute pinnacle of any tool that you can use to really activate your whole brain. And we know without doubt that when the neural pathways are talking, and when the left and right hemisphere are working together, and when we can access our executive functions, which are in the prefrontal cortex, and we can regulate our hyperactivity, or we can integrate our sensory information, all of the things that our brain's doing, when it is on and working and doing all its things, that is not a brain in survival mode. That is a brain that is functioning at its best.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So music is like I kind of say music is to the brain as breath is to the lungs. It's that important.
Fantastic. But it's got those things. I mean, you're talking about the creative side of using your voice, but there's so much history contained in your voice. So I've got quite a deep voice, and I always have had. So when we used to sing at school, I could never get to the high notes, but no one told me to sing in my level, my tone. So I chose for myself just to mime. So instead of singing, I'd be doing this mimey stuff. And so throughout my whole life, that sense of personality related to my voice was quite, I couldn't blame the guitar and my small fingers. It was my personal voice.
Yeah, it's such a common, it's a really, really common narrative. And luckily we don't tell children to mime anymore. And we praise all of their creative endeavors. Most people do. But this goes a long way back. This goes back about 400 years in the Western world. Before that, all cultures in the whole world had made music together. There was no such thing as being musical or not being musical. That's kind of like saying, oh, that person breathes really well. I wish I could breathe as well as them. There was no concept of what it means to be musical or not musical. Everyone just expressed together musically. It was part of the culture. And then about 400 or so years ago in the Western world, it completely changed and it became a real us and them thing. So the educated, privileged people became the musicians and everyone else became the listeners, and it created a big divide. And it's a myth that some people are musical and some aren't, or that some should be playing and some people should be listening, but it's carried on, and we're victims of that. Like the way you literally can only sing out of tune if you're singing someone else's song. So you could be singing to yourself and it's not out of tune. There's no such thing as being in tune or out of tune. The only reason that we really suppress our musicality is because we are trying to hold up to someone else's expectation of what music should sound like. And that's a really, really sad thing. And that's something I'm working really hard to try, and very gently and slowly though, because it's very ingrained, to really sort of push people out of their comfort zone a little bit and help them sort of rediscover or remember their voice and their musicality, because our voices especially have become so suppressed. And throughout the whole of history, every single culture has used their voice so expressively and in so therapeutically, and in ways that really, really help their parasympathetic nervous system and their trauma release and their body movement. And it's also intrinsically linked that we really do need to start using our voices the way through our ancestors did.
And it's therapy too. I have an experience of having a bodywork session many years ago now that released lots of tensions in my thoracic cage. And I got up. I was at a 4-day retreat, and I got up early in the morning, and I started walking through the woods, and I started singing Amazing Grace, and I got all the tones, and it was a phenomenal experience to be able to feel that relaxed in my body. And all the cows were dancing, and all the rabbits were coming out dancing. And after that, I decided I'd go and have some singing lessons. And when I was in the UK and was working with this incredible woman, and it was fantastic. It was definitely going for therapy for me. And I think the thing about her was that I never felt embarrassed singing, and there was that kind of embarrassment that I'd carried for a long time, and probably still do in many ways. My experience now just is we bought some electric bikes just before lockdown, so we're quite hilly where we are, and we've been going singing, and I've been just singing out top of my voice, cycling down the road. Got songs from Les Miserables, and which were quite poignant at this time as well. Empty chairs at empty tables.
Yes,
kind
exactly. The real benefit from singing show tunes or songs from musicals, musical theatre, soundtracks to movies, anything like that, is that they are created around, they're very highly melody dominant. And melody affects our limbic system, which is the part of the brain involved in releasing emotions, also anxiety and threat responses. But when we experience melody, it activates the limbic system in a way that allows us to feel our emotions, feel our feelings, or release our emotions. That's why when we watch Les Miserables, or we listen to even Disney princess movies, I'm crying in Disney princess movies because the music is created to allow us to feel things. So listening to music from shows and musical theatre and opera is a really, really great way of attaining emotional regulation. So if you had to put music in, if you had to really put it in a nutshell, and it's a lot more complex than this, melody goes with emotions and rhythm goes with movement. Okay. And you can use melody and rhythm as well as a whole bunch of other elements, music-based elements, strategically in a way that helps regulate us.
Is music used less in school now? Is it still?
Yeah. It's definitely used less in school in formal ways. And, budget cuts, music's always the first thing to go. So in terms of formal music education, there's less. I believe that especially in primary schools and childcare and early education, there is still a lot of musical activities that go on within the classroom. Although I do believe in really recent years that's become less, because there's I don't know if it's the same with you, but in Australia there's a lot of outcome-based expectations even from early in primary school now, and we have standardized testing that happens, and so there's a lot of real work that needs to get done. But I do believe that teachers, especially early childhood teachers, are still using their voices melodically with inflection, and that creates that the brain then perceives an experience of music just by the way we use our voices. Clapping games, these types of things, skipping ropes, that's creating rhythmic input, because music is an umbrella term. So generally when we think of music, we kind of think of the song or the performance or the playlist or the album we're listening to, but music is actually an umbrella term for a sum of all its parts, and all its parts are all very separate musical elements. So melody, rhythm, repetition, vibration, frequency, even silence. Like, we literally cannot have rhythm if there is not silence. Physicality, the physicality of music is something we don't think about often. Tempo, volume, like the list goes on. And this is why, with all of these tiny little elements, this is why we have such a full brain activation when we experience it. So I do believe that in schools, especially in the early years, teachers are still implementing a lot of those individual, they instinctively use their voice in ways that work with little children. And that's really important. But, schools that are cutting music from the programs just do not understand the way the brain works, and literally do not understand that if they don't experience music, they can't learn. In fact, the limbic system and melody, the limbic system is involved in quite a few different processes, but the three of the main ones are melody, emotion, and long-term memory. And I tend to think of melody, emotion, and long-term memory as three best friends who are just constantly joined at the hip. Like, you don't really get one without the other. So when we experience melody, we form long-term memories. That's why I've done a lot of work in dementia care, and that's why people with dementia who can't speak their child's name can sing the entire "You Are My Sunshine." And that's why when you learn the times tables to a tune, or the periodic table to a tune, I've taught my children my mobile number to a tune. That is how we develop long-term memories. There's literally no way in the world that 2- and 3-year-olds would know 26 random pieces of information in the correct order if it wasn't for the alphabet song. So it's the melody, the brain experiencing melody, that allows the long-term memories to be created. So in schools, if we want children to learn, which is essentially long-term memory formation, we really need music to be part of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So is your work mainly with children?
I do a combination. I've sort of spent the last I guess the first 15 years of my work as a registered music therapist, I was working across early childhood intervention, so working with little ones and doing lots of group music therapy and music groups, and also working in dementia care and palliative care, in aged care. I actually found them to be quite similar in terms of what we're trying to achieve with supporting neural function. But in the last few years, I've really switched the way I work, and I'm no longer working with clients as a therapist. I'm now creating resources and programs, and just basically I'm now sort of an educator, I guess. So I'm teaching people how they can use music strategically in their home and in their classroom, and how they can access their voice and access music in a way that they'd sort of forgotten how or not been taught before.
When you say, who are you talking about? Just people that are involved in their profession in some way, or just
mainly
dads, or
mainly mums, dads, teachers, and service providers. So I guess all of the resources I'm creating are for adults. Most of the adults who come to me and seek my resources are looking for information to help them support their children. So my e-course, which is called Brains Equal Behaviours, is all around the philosophy that the behaviour is never the problem. The behaviour is always a byproduct of what's going on in the brain. And so if children are hitting, kicking, punching, running away, running across roads, self-harming, whatever it might be, focusing on the behavior doesn't really help, but understanding that there's something going on in the brain that needs supporting is what will help. So my real focus there is on helping people learn about how the brain works and how we can support the brain to regulate. And then often the behavioral stuff just drops away of its own accord. And then I teach people how to use music to support the brain to regulate. But I really do, like, with almost all of my resources, I start at the beginning. I start with, this is what's happening in the brain, because it's almost like give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day, teach him how to fish and he will eat forever. It's kind of like that. If I was to give this is how you can use music therapeutically, without people really understanding the why behind it, we lose motivation. It's very difficult to create a lifestyle around something without understanding the why. So I'm basically talking to parents, and I really did start off creating resources all about how to support our children, but that led into people going, so what about me? And that's when I created the Brain Care Cafe, which is my membership, and we do a similar thing in there, but it's all about supporting our own brains to function at its best, basically using music.
And that Brain Care Cafe is 2 times a year or something, did I see?
Brain Care Cafe is it opens for new members twice a year. It's actually open right now, just for a week though. But then every week in the Brain Care Cafe, I deliver a new brain care strategy, and each strategy is something that is almost always music based, so based around using one of the elements. It might be rhythm, for example. And so one of the strategies we did recently was going for a walk, and once we were in a steady pace with our feet, we would start to hum or sing or whistle or just think of a little tune, and then recognize that the tune that we are singing to ourselves is in sync with the footsteps of our feet, and then recognizing that in fact we have just come up with our own little tune. It's got a beat, it's got a melody. And this was a really simple way of recognizing that we can write our own tune, because we do a lot of melodic mantras in the Brain Care Cafe, which is where we come up with our affirmation or the thing that we are really trying to embody in our lives, and then we sing it. Rather than reading it or writing it, it's a sung mantra, because the power of singing has such an impact on the brain that it really helps the actual embodiment, like it helps neuroplasticity. So it's really good for learning new belief systems or patterns. But so many people are really struggling with going, oh, I can't come up with a tune. I don't know how to make up I don't know how to make up a tune. I don't know how to make up a song. And that's a conditioned belief in so many of us. So one of the strategies recently was just going for a walk, recognizing that our feet, once we were in a pace, was a beat. And then recognizing how simple it was to just start humming a tune and that it's in sync. And yeah, so that was one of the strategies. Every week there's a different strategy.
Yes.
And there's a lot of other cool stuff in there. There's interviews with experts, and there's
that happens once a week if you're a member.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, oh, cool. And for how long is the cafe open for? What do you?
The cafe's open all the time, but it's only open for new members to join us twice a year. It happens to be open right now, and it's open until Sunday. So, if you're watching this or listening to this later, it might be not open for new members, but there's always a link to join a wait list. And there's always a link to find out more about it, whether it's open or not. But this goes all year round.
Okay.
And the reason I only like to open it for members twice a year is because we have such a great dynamic in there and a really fabulous community who are supporting each other on their brain care and using music for regulation and anxiety management, that to have it constantly open for sort of new members to come in, I fear it would flood the dynamic a bit. So we kind of just keep it relatively,
Yeah, fantastic. Easy tools for people to learn. The breath is really fundamental here, isn't it?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I'm assuming you do breath work as well.
Yes.
Well, I know you do, sorry, because I saw that somewhere. So
yeah, well,
you would anyway, because you have to really when you're working.
Yeah, I mean, breath work is one of the most fundamental pillars of brain care. It activates our vagus nerve, and controlled breathing is what allows our bloodstream to be freshly oxygenated, and it's the oxygenated blood that helps all our organs and our brain function at its best. Without it, we can't. So breath work is very important. The cool thing is that when you sing out loud, you are actually doing your controlled breathing. Mm-hmm. Because when you are singing out with your voice, you can't breathe in at the same time as you're singing out. So when you sing, it's an out breath. Mm-hmm. And then you breathe in again and you sing the next phrase. And so the act of singing is a controlled breathing technique, and it's a fabulous one for children to do because you don't have to teach them about breathing or practice it. It just happens by the act of singing. Similarly to reading out loud, the same thing. If you read out loud, you are doing a controlled breathing exercise. And then once you understand this, you can be strategic about it. So if I was anxious, or just say one of my children was anxious, I do have a child who's always anxious. So we will sing a song together, and then I will strategically slow it down a little bit, and we'll sing together, and it's a bit slower. And that means that her breath is becoming longer and more controlled. Also, if we are reading out loud, or if you're getting your child to read out loud to you, you can just ask them to read a bit more slowly, and that controls the breath as well. It makes it slower and longer.
So it's a slightly longer out breath.
Yeah, it's a longer out breath.
Perfect for most people to get back in the parasympathetic system.
Exactly, because you cannot truly inhale unless you have completely exhaled.
Yes. Yeah. Fantastic. What tools can you offer for people, just to, if someone was listening now and they thought, hey, something simple, would you offer something simple breath work? Would you offer something simple voice work? Or
okay, so there's a few things. So to start reclaiming your musicality, if you're someone who feels like you can't sing, or you're nervous about your musician skill, your music skills, or anything like that, and there's a lot of people, I definitely learned a lot with Every Little Cell, because on Instagram I asked people to sing it in their IG stories, in their Instagram stories, and then tag Every Little Cell, and I had hundreds of messages from people saying I could never sing in public. It's amazing. I love what you do. I would love to sing it on my Instagram feed, but I could never in a million years do that. And I really didn't realize how ingrained it was. So for people who are struggling in that way, we've just been confident about them being a musical person. I think the best place to start is just by, we spend our whole life singing to other people's songs, singing songs on the radio, and which is fine. But when we do that, we are singing somebody else's pitch, somebody else's way, and that can lead us to, if we have to strain to sing high or strain to sing that fast or strain to sing low, then we are not having a relationship with our own musicality. So I would suggest doing your own singing. You can do it by yourself, and just start by moving your voice around, like da, la, la, la. To me, that la feels really comfortable, and when I sing that pitch, comes out easily. If I was to try and sing a high note, I would tell myself I can't sing, because that does not come easily to me. So just playing around with your voice and feeling the speed at which you like to sing, the pitch, doing it your way will help you start developing a relationship with your singing voice. So there's that. That's the starting point for that. If you're someone who is experiencing emotional, like if you are either pent up with emotion, because emotion is very literally energy in motion. It needs to move. It needs to come through us and just come in and out. It's when we hang on to it and don't express it that it just becomes pent up and pent up and pent up until we explode or have a meltdown or whatever. So if we feel like we are filled with emotion, we all know what that feeling is, then anything melodic, listening to or singing or watching a movie that has a beautiful soundtrack, making a playlist of songs that are melody based. So what I mean by that is that they're very tuneful, as in hip hop or something probably wouldn't be there. That's more rhythmic. Anything that's very melodic, love songs. We all have songs that make us cry. Any songs that induce emotion can be a really good way of releasing pent up emotion that's become pent up inside us. So that's the most important thing for people who are experiencing emotional dysregulation. And then for people who are either really, really highly active, what we would call hyperactive, or lethargic and just don't want to move, just lying on the couch and like, oh, I can't move. Rhythm is a really great way to, because one of the strongest relationships in our brain is between, the strongest neural pathways is between the motor cortex, which is across here. That's the part of the brain in charge of all our movements. The relationship between that and what we hear is one of the strongest neural pathways in our brain. So when we hear rhythm, when we clap, it might just be clapping like this. It might be listening to something rhythmic, listening to African drumming, listening to hip hop, doing some walking, marching. When we make this sound with our feet, we're creating rhythm. It doesn't have to be like, you don't have to be able to play a drum kit. You can do this so simply. When we create rhythm, our body falls in sync with it. So we can create a faster rhythm, and that will heighten our levels of physicality in a way that will help stimulate us, or we can reduce it in a way that will slow us down.
Yeah, and stop trying to copy what it sounds like when you hear a record, when you hear a song.
Yeah.
That's quite cool. So you can, and I think that's the same with anything you do. You know, if you teach yoga, people have to own yoga for themselves and know what their limitations are. And if you really know that, then you're really doing your yoga well.
Yeah.
And I come from a stiff stock, so I'll never be able to bend like some people. And I also have a low voice, so I'll never be able to get as high as some people. So if I'm looking at, because some of those Les Miserables are quite challenging if you look at it, but I'm going to start singing them with, so that I can do it more, I'm going to do it more with ease.
Yeah.
And find because my yoga is all about finding a place of relationship with ease, or just coming up to a little bit of tension, but not going deep into tension, so that I have a more kind relationship with myself. And if I translate that into singing, then try not to do things that you
It's
can't do, because it just
it's
doesn't really help, does it?
yeah, it's exactly the same. The thing is, no one has really given us permission to do this with music before, because we really do believe that to be musical is to be in tune, to do it the way it's been taught to us according to the Western scale and the rules of music and all of that. We just need the permission and the understanding that that isn't what music is.
Yes.
Music is an inherent part of being human, and we all have it. Once we understand that, we have the permission, we can really start experimenting. I think it's as simple as that, just having the permission to experiment.
What's your kind of main music that you like? Do you have a favorite?
Oh, I change.
No,
I like a lot of music.
Yes.
I used to love jazz and blues when I was growing up. I was a saxophone player, so that was my breathing,
Right.
and that was my regulation.
Yes.
These days I really love chanting, and that can be either kirtan, like Hindu chanting, or just any sort of song that's very repetitive and chants over and over and over. And that's for the fact that repetition creates a sense of predictability.
Yes.
And when our brain can predict what's coming next, even if it's just a sense of predictability that's coming from the sensory environment, I still might not know what's going on next in my actual life. But if I'm able to create a consistent input in my environment that's very repetitive, it helps my brain stay regulated. And so when I listen to chanting, it makes me feel great.
Yeah. And that makes you feel safe as well, because you get that predictability that you kind of know where it's going. So what's it been like? What's your insights around this whole lockdown business and what people have been experiencing? I mean, I've had 8 weeks of daily yoga classes that I've been offering, and had a lot of people that have been has come for the whole 8 weeks. But we've seen people going through different emotions. It's like being in this big ocean, and we're all in these different vessels together, having a slightly different experience. But there's this kind of wave that we're all on, and it's been quite oppressive. It's been quite challenging for people in terms of being locked down, the grief, not seeing people. What kind of thing have you noticed, and what kind of thing in your world has been supportive for you in your music world?
Yeah. I mean, I've experienced all of those emotions as well. Firstly, I live in very regional Tasmania, so I'm fairly isolated as it is. So in terms of, there hasn't been too much upheaval to my routine. But I personally have experienced the death of one of my best friends during isolation. And so I wasn't able to see her before she died. I was not able to there was no funeral. We had to do a Zoom call in lieu of a funeral, and I wasn't able to be with my friends and family, which was, a huge change to how anyone would expect to grieve, especially one of their closest friends. I actually found that what it gave me was the biggest opportunity to grieve in a way that was really true and not shaped around the expectation of how I sort of should be around everybody else. I found that this allowed me to cry loudly, like if I'd been at a funeral or with other people, I would have sort of wiped my tears away and made small talk, and that's all very important as well. But I really found this huge opportunity for me to dance. I danced a lot. I listened to music a lot that we would listen to together. I really cried. I really did it. Like, I really actively grieved instead of having a grief, a socially accepted style of grief, if you understand what I mean.
Totally, yes.
So whilst it was extremely challenging in a lot of ways, in terms of me being able to express myself and I think heal in a lot of ways and process grief, it actually has been a real gift and a real opportunity. So that's my biggest takeaway from this time.
Fantastic. That's awesome. And it's that same thing, isn't it? That socially acceptable thing that we keep doing that doesn't allow us to be who we are.
you know, and it's only adults who do it though. If we could express our emotions like children, they don't wipe their tears away before they drop off their chin, as if tears are something to be wiped away. They yell and scream and stomp and they express themselves no matter where they are.
Yes.
We are the ones who have self-imposed all these rules on how it's done, and because of that, our parasympathetic nervous system is just suppressed because you know, it's not used to us being able to freely regulate, and it's not safe.
Yeah.
We have conditioned ourselves to believe it's not safe to cry in public,
Yes.
not safe to cry without a tissue,
Yes.
not safe to sing out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's sad, but it's really cool that people like you are out there livening this whole world up with music and sound. That's
thank you.
But also movement's really important as well, and getting out there, because do you want to talk a little bit about your 12 pillars? That
Sure. Once I start talking about the 12 pillars,
are we going to go on for hours now? Are we?
Probably.
Well, I've got nothing else to do.
I actually, where is the list of the 12 pillars? I've got them, so I always forget them when everyone goes, so tell me about the 12 pillars. I'm like, oh God, what are they again? But one of them is,
release, protect, sensory breaks, which I think is really cool as well.
Yeah.
Which is what yoga and meditation's all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's giving yourself a break from all this bombardment of, and we've been really bombarded, haven't we? With, I mean, how many truths are out there? Do we really know what's going on?
Yeah, and that's that all these truths, what's actually going on, that is one of the pillars of brain care that's around pulling back from information. And that is a really important part of brain care, because we get bombarded with information, and we just, throughout the whole of human history, no one has had access to anywhere near even a fraction of the amount of information that we have coming at us every single day in the Western world. And our brain simply was not designed to be able to process and integrate and make sense of the sheer volume of information.
Yes.
So it's very important to pull back from all of the channels of information that just don't align with us, just make us feel off. You know, I don't watch the news, but I still can source my information. So it's about doing a bit of an audit, an information audit, recognize where things are coming from. For me, when I first did this, it meant unfollowing a lot of social media stuff, especially a lot of opinion pieces and blogs and things that information isn't relevant really. To me, it wasn't. And also, one thing we do a lot of is we Google random stuff that is not necessary to know. We just constantly bring information into our world that is not necessary for our survival. And the brain has only ever had information that is relevant to survival. So that's pulling back from information. Having sensory breaks is also important, because again, it's only since the Industrial Revolution that we have had this sensory bombardment in our lives. Before the Industrial Revolution, and then yet again before the technology age, so really even only in the last 20 or so years have we had screens in front of our faces all the time. We didn't have the sheer volume of sensory stuff in our environments that we do now, and again, the brain was not designed to be able to cope with this much sensory information, so we're all experiencing a sense of sensory overload, which leads to anxiety, survival mode, and it's just become so normalized. So it's very important to take breaks. So even just breaks where we close our eyes, just closing our eyes for 5 minutes cuts out so much sensory information that's coming to our brain. Putting on headphones so we don't hear all the noise, even if it's to listen to a podcast, it means that we're listening to one thing instead of having all of the peripheral noise in our environment available to our brain. So stuff like that is a really important way of caring for our brain care. Pulling back from information, sensory breaks, physicality, you mentioned physical movement. It's so important, because when we move our body, we activate, or we allow for proprioceptive input, which, as you know, through yoga, it's well, yoga is one of the best forms of proprioception. And that's that feeling inside your body that you get when it's moving. So if I was to stretch out my arm, even if I close my eyes, I know that my arm is still stretched out because of that feeling inside it. That is proprioception, and the brain loves it, and the brain needs it to function and to stay organized and to do all its jobs. So the more we move our bodies, the more our brain is actually able to do its job. And you know, trauma especially is something that is stored in the body. You know, posture, there's been research done where they asked people with a tight posture, they asked people to have a really tight posture, and they got them all pent up so their shoulders were up and they were all clenched, and then they asked them to feel joy, and it was impossible. And then they got people whose posture was open and flowing and asked them to feel fear, and it was impossible. So there's an intrinsic link between what's happening in our body and our emotional state. So moving our body more is paramount to brain care.
I heard of they did an experiment where they showed two different groups of people a video, and one group of people had a pencil in their mouth like that, which actually simulated a smile, and that group of people saw the video less scary than the people who didn't have the pencil in their mouth simulating that smile.
Yeah.
Which has got the tone for every cell in my body is happy.
Yeah.
I've been we've been going through the body, looking at the skeleton and smiling at each part in your body, and it has that kind of uplifting nature to it. So I recognize those things really well too. What do you do? Because you've got a very active brain too, though.
I do. I have a super active brain, and I have an attention deficit, so I find it very difficult to anchor my thoughts on anything. And that can be really exhausting. So I, as an adult now, can channel that into my work, especially, and channel it into things that I'm interested in and that I find it do it more easily to sort of focus or engage in. But it's very tiring. You know, the brain uses up something like 10, what is it? I can't remember. It's something like a quarter of our whole daily energy is used just on the brain, and the brain is like a 2% of our body mass, and it uses an enormous proportion of our daily energy. And then, you know, if you are a neurodivergent person, your brain is on super highly active, you are using a lot more energy, which is why there's a lot of fatigue. I have to work really hard. My lifestyle is now created around my brain care, because a few years ago, in 2016, I found it very difficult to function at all. I was almost completely nonverbal. I was unable to finish any task. You know, I couldn't really make myself a cup of tea. I'd be driving places where I've driven my entire life, and I'd get to an intersection and not be able to picture which way I had to go to get to where, couldn't picture how to get where I wanted to go. And a lot of other things as well. Of course, it was immediately put down to postnatal depression, but I kept telling everyone I literally am not depressed. I did not feel depressed at all. I don't believe it was a mental health condition or a mental health illness. But it was definitely, my brain was completely dysregulated and in a state of shutdown. So I really had to self-identify this, because I couldn't speak and couldn't explain my theory to people, and really just start adapting my own brain care. And my lifestyle now is based around all of the things I've talked to you about. So especially sensory breaks, because I'm very sensory defensive with noise and touch especially. So I have to have lots of sensory breaks. I've pulled back from so much information. I've had to set so many boundaries, which is really hard for us to do, because we were never taught to set, no one's ever really taught to set boundaries. And our parents mostly are, you know, be polite, say yes, people pleasing type parents because of the generation that they were. So, you know, the last few generations of people have been very much based around doing the right thing. And so we're as children, we're not really exposed to people seeing people setting boundaries either. So one of the hardest things for me is to know where my line is in terms of my own self-care and brain care and being able to say no to people.
Yeah.
I found that exceptionally challenging. And I sing every day now. I do my melodic mantras every day. I play instruments, like very simple, like I play singing bowls and chimes, and I walk every day on the beach. And I recognize which parts of the family routine are difficult for me, and I have an amazing husband who does a lot of stuff. And so I no longer work with clients. I predominantly create my own resources now, which has meant that I have less people around me, because I'm also, you know, very empathetic, and I feel all of the energy from all of the people around. So
I can see that.
Yeah. So I've had to really, really become super aware of who I am,
Yes.
what I need. And that was a long process. Long process.
How do you work with those structures and boundaries? What techniques do you have?
I have started, well, basically melodic mantra has, I believe melodic mantra has been my biggest technique. For example, one of my mantras is I am not my parents, nor my sisters or my brothers. I can love and respect them and be me. And I'll just sing that over and over and over and over. A little bit like the Every Little Cell song. It's so catchy. It's so simple. Once I start singing it, it gets in my head, and then it's just, I'm singing it to myself throughout the day. And that is, when we experience music, our brain releases dopamine, and that is what is linked to making neuroplasticity happen. So I start to really believe these things because I am singing them in my mind over and over and over. So rather than making behavioral change, like I said before, and I fully believe that the behavioral stuff is should never be the focus. It's always the byproduct. So rather than trying to change my actions, I'm consciously changing my belief system.
Nice. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. And I've got a few melodic mantras that are kind of like, my boundaries are important. They keep my family healthy. And that reminds me that I don't have to say yes to all the social occasions, and that we can, you know, because my children as well need to not have a busy life. We have all thrived as a family during isolation. So all of those little melodic mantras that I sing to myself have really helped me consciously shed a lot of preconditioned stuff.
Yeah. You're doing yoga singing or yoga music or something, isn't it? So
yeah.
So the voice and using the voice has all those things of emotional release, giving yourself those sensory breaks from lots of other things. That emotional relief is really important, isn't it? That because it's so tied up in our voice. I recognize that. And even when you talk and then you hear yourself talking on a video or something like that, it's kind of, our voices sounds dead odd, doesn't it? But you're doing yoga on the body. It's yoga by the voice.
Yes.
Do you come back?
Nada, is that called Nada yoga?
Yeah. Do you come back into your body much? Do you feel when you talk about structures and boundaries, do you kind of work and function from a different part of your physicality? Do you get into your bones? Do you get into your kidneys? Do you?
Yes, I do. But I have to be really, because of my attention deficit, I find it very difficult to stay in those spaces. So when I have to really consciously work at visualizing or experiencing where I am in my body. So I do find it a difficult practice, but it's something that I continue to sort of do bits and pieces of, because I'm also aware that any moment of experiencing this stuff is beneficial. But I'm not someone who could, you know, I'm not someone who finds it very easy to sit or to be in. I find yoga really hard, as much as I know how wonderful it is. I find it so difficult to do all the things at once because of my
You should try my bone yoga. It's quite different.
I totally should.
Yeah, because I'd be curious to see whether, because we do work slightly differently, and I don't really engage in that kind of big, kind of stretchy way. So it is working slightly different. And I think that you've obviously found your way that really supports you. And one of the things that we've been experiencing or exploring when we've been doing the yoga is moving with kindness. And so when we do a certain movement where we just gently engage in the structure in some way, and then I suggest that people explore kindness, man, it's just like, it's so different. And you kind of have a really good sense of how much I'm putting into my movement is up to me. How I engage myself is up to me. I can choose to be kind with myself, or I could choose to beat myself up. I could choose to worry about my voice not being good, or I could just sing a beautiful melody and be happy with it. And it's like being kind to ourselves and not, I don't know. For me, that was probably one of the most important things as the outcome of these 8 weeks of exploring with a group of people. Kindness.
That's a really profound learning.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And it makes so much sense. I'm picturing myself now moving. I'm picturing how my body would look if I was intentionally moving it with kindness. And I can imagine that it would be a very flowing, gentle type movement.
Yeah, and it could be, and it could one day it could be more staccato. You never know. It could be, because every day, in a sense, we're different and our needs are different.
Yeah.
I had there was one stage where and again frustration was coming up around the lockdown and different tensions, and I remember just sitting down in the garden, feeling really beating myself up, I suppose. And I asked myself, why don't you just relate to this issue that you're dealing in your head in the same way that you are teaching your yoga about kindness? And so I then focused on myself and I said, okay, I'll be kind with myself. I'll engage it, but just enough to experience it, but I'm not going to go deep into it. And it was fantastic the way it changed. And for me, when I heard you singing Every Cell in My Body, it was around that sort of time, and I went, that's really kind. I'm being really kind to every cell in my body. It was the power of, one of the phrases I came up with was making the profound simple and the simple profound. I don't know if I really came up with that. I might have nicked it. I kind of owned it for a while anyway. And it was like, and that simplicity of just doing this melody can be quite profound. It doesn't have to be a complicated.
Yeah, and I agree. And with every little cell, something I just thought of then as you were saying it, it is about the cells, and it's about consciously being with ourselves. It's not about being happy. And there was a lot of confusion with people, thinking that they should sing this song to try and make themselves be happy. And as a music therapist, would be remiss of me to try and just get everyone to be happy, because happiness has got no more. I tend to, we sort of think of happiness as the coolest kid in the school, and anger is the one that we don't want our kids to play with. And if we thought of all the emotions as pupils, we totally have some of them on pedestals, and that's just not how it should be. Every emotion is valid. So I know you know that, but there's been a lot of people who've been trying to use this song as a source to, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when it means that we're not validating our emotions authentically, it becomes a bit of a problem. But the song is about just being conscious of ourselves, every little cell.
And it's hard to be angry when you're singing Every Little Cell in My Body is Happy. And the same way, if you're doing a movement with the breath and your mind and it's slow, if you're focused, and if they're have a certain sync to them, it's very difficult to be uptight with that as well. So that using those. So what little thing would you like to offer if people have stayed till the end? It's been awesome. It's been really cool chatting with you. Do you have something that you'd like to offer, or you?
As in like a.
Yeah, so someone could go away. That's cool. I'm going to try that when on my own.
I would say if you do one thing after this, if you want to action anything I've talked about and you do one thing, go and like make yourself a playlist. If you are someone who needs emotional release, make yourself a playlist of melodic songs or songs that make you feel things, and always align with your own musical identity. There's no right or wrong songs here. It's just what works for you. And if you're someone who's really hyperactive or really lethargic, you might want to make yourself a playlist based on songs that are quite rhythmic, drumming, or classical music, which is very repetitive, or hip hop or rap, anything that has sort of a repetitious but as opposed to da 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 da. Make yourself a little playlist and just experiment with how it makes you feel and how you respond to it afterwards. And then it's all trial and error with music, using music strategically. Start there and then see what happens.
And go for a walk and hum.
Yes.
Rhythm.
Go for a walk and hum.
My wife hums all the time.
Yeah, so it's something that
shower. She used to hum when she was a kid, to get herself to go off to sleep, and with our grandson, she hums with him as well.
It's really something we don't do anymore. We don't whistle.
My dad generation. I remember when my dad was in pain, he'd go, and my sense was always that he was doing was resonating in some way with his pain. And it was soothing it. It wasn't just like I'm moaning. It was more like that was his own vibrational voice therapy for himself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's brilliant. We should use our voice. We should be using our voice like this all the time.
Yeah, we should be. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thanks so much. Well, anything else you want to say? Should we?
No, just remember that to be human is to be musical. So you are musical. It's a fallacy to think that only the people whose parents could afford a piano teacher for them or a Western instrument are the musical ones.
Yes.
It's completely inaccurate. To be human is to be musical. So you are musical. It's got nothing to do with being in tune. So do feel free to use your voice more and to create rhythm more and to access music in your life more. We are all, we are all musical, and there should be no us and them when it comes to music. And so that's something, the more people that understand that, the more we shed that whole us and them sort of paradigm that music has become stuck in. So please explain this to your friends as well. They are musical. Sing together.
Yeah, and it's kind of that Western world, isn't it, that seems to be more oppressive.
It's only the Western world.
Yeah, yeah.
And the Western scales, the Western music scene, the whole Western music thing. It's just, it's trapped us and suppressed us.
It has, hasn't it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let's go and sing. Let's go and hum and have melody and be really comfortable with your own internal melody if it comes out as a sound.
Yes, exactly. And enjoy it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for
Thank you for having me, Paul. Thanks, everyone.
So what I'll do is I'll stop recording and we can have a little chat afterwards. But thanks very much, Alison. Thank you.
Thank you.